The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of dry leaves moving across the ground. Far away from any home or village, an old ruined place stood like a forgotten scar on the land. In the middle of those ruins, there was a deep stone well, its mouth wide open like the jaws of some ancient beast. The air inside was damp, cold, and carried the smell of wet earth mixed with something old and rotten down in that well. An alien woman lay on the hard ground. Her body was thin, her clothes torn, and her skin carried strange glowing patterns that once shined brightly but now looked faint and weak. She had been thrown there by people who did not care whether she lived or died. For them, she was nothing, just a burden. They left her to starve, to rot, and to vanish in the dark. She pressed her back against the rough stone wall, every small movement causing pain. Her hands trembled as she touched her own face, tears mixing with dust and dirt. She had shouted for hours when she was first thrown down, her voice echoing up the stone shaft, but no answer came. The sky above remained blind and deaf, and her throat grew dry and cracked from begging. The water at the bottom was little more than a black puddle. She dragged herself to it and cupped a handful. The taste was bitter, but she forced it down. She knew if she gave up drinking, her voice would vanish, and if her voice vanished, no one would ever know she was here. The woman's mind was filled with fear, but also with memories, she thought. Of her child, small and fragile, waiting far away. She thought of her family, maybe still searching, maybe already mourning. The thought that her child would believe she had abandoned them made her chest hurt more than hunger. With each memory, her tears grew heavier. Each tear rolled down her glowing skin, shining like tiny stars in the darkness. Her voice, weak but still alive, rose again. She begged for life, begged for mercy, begged for mercy, begged for anyone to hear her words. Broke into sobs. Please, someone, I do not want to die here. The sound carried up the stone walls, the echo stretching into the night air above. The well was deep, and the world outside was wide and empty. But still, the sound traveled. The woman did not know it. But her cry reached far past the ruins, past the broken stones and into the silence of the night road. Above the well, the moonlight touched the rim. Its pale glow slipped down, lighting her face just a little. She looked up at it with hope and fear, wondering if it was the last light she would ever see. She whispered to herself, "If anyone can hear me, please come." Time felt like it was standing still. The walls seemed to close in around her. Every sound, the drip of water, the scrape of a rat moving in the stones, felt like it was mocking her, telling her no one would come. Her body shivered, her lips pale, her breathing slow, still. She forced her voice out again, the words breaking through the silence of the dead night. "Kay." Her cry was filled with all the weight of her heart. It was not just a call for help. It was a cry of a mother. A cry of someone who refused to die forgotten. "Please, hear me. I am still alive," she whispered, then shouted, then whispered again, until her body grew weak. High above, far away, the night air carried her plea across the land. The ruins stayed silent. The stones stayed still, but her voice kept moving. Each echo seemed to stretch farther, reaching into places where silence had ruled for years. Her glowing skin dimmed like a candle ready to fade, but her spirit still pushed, even when her body was weak. Even when her breath came like broken gasps, she forced out sound, forced out hope. She could not stop. Because if she stopped, her child would never know she had tried. The dark well was her prison, but also her last chance. She believed that if her cry reached even one heart, if one being in this wide, cold world heard her, then maybe, just maybe, she would live above the ruins. The stars glittered like cold eyes watching. Somewhere unseen in the distance, a human walked alone under that same sky. He did not yet know that tonight he would hear something that would change both his life and hers. He did not yet know that a cry from a dark well would pull him into a story of danger, hope, and impossible choice. But the alien woman, broken and abandoned, kept calling. Her voice fought the silence again and again. Rising out of the dark, carried by the night, it was her last weapon, her last chance, her last plea for life. The road was quiet that night. A lonely human named Daniel walked slowly, his boots kicking up dust with every step. He carried only a small pack on his back and a dim lantern in his hand. The air was cool, the wind dry, and the stars above stretched like a silver river across the dark sky. Daniel was tired. His journey had been long, and his feet ached. He wanted to find a place to rest, maybe under an old tree or near a ruined wall. But the night carried strange sounds, and his ears stayed sharp. At first, it was only the whisper of the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the distant call of a night bird. But then, as he passed the edge of the old ruins, he froze. He heard something else, something faint but different. It was not the wind. It was a voice, weak and broken. Daniel stood still, his breath caught in his throat. He tilted his head. Listening harder, the sound came again, carried on the air. "Please, someone, help me." He frowned and looked around. The ruins were nothing but broken stone and wild weeds. Shadows stretched like claws across the ground. No one lived here anymore. At least, that was what he thought. The voice came. Again, softer this time, but filled with pain. Daniel's lantern shook in his hand. His heart beat faster. He could not explain why. But the sound crawled under his skin and refused to let him go. Most travelers would have ignored it. They would have thought it was only wind or maybe some trick of the night. But Daniel was not like most. He had seen too much suffering in his life to turn away. He whispered to himself, "That was no ghost. Someone's down there." He walked into the ruins, each step careful. The ground was uneven, stones loose under his boots. The moonlight spilled across the cracked walls, and weeds grew through broken floors. His lantern cast a pale circle, and his shadow stretched long and thin. Then, he saw the old well in the middle of the ruins. Its stones were cracked, its edges broken. It looked like no one had touched it for years. But as Daniel drew closer, the sound rose again. Clear enough, this time to shatter any doubt. "Please, hear me. I am still alive," the voice cried. Daniel leaned over the edge of the well. He raised his lantern, the light spilling downward. At first, he saw only darkness, then movement. Then his eyes caught at a faint glow, like dying embers, flickering far below. His heart skipped. He whispered, "God above." It was not his imagination. There was someone down there, and not just someone, a being unlike any he had seen before. The glow was coming from her skin. Marked with faint lines of light, she lay against the stone, weak and trembling, her eyes lifting toward him with desperate hope. The sight hit him harder than any wound. He gripped the stone edge tighter. His mind raced. Why was she here? Who had thrown her down? Could he even reach her? The woman spoke again, her voice weak but trembling with need. "Please, do not leave me, I beg you." Daniel's chest tightened. He knew what he should do. The safe thing would be to walk away. This well was old, the stones loose, the depth dangerous. If he climbed down, he might never climb out. He could fall, he could die. No one would ever know where his bones ended, but when he looked into her eyes, even from this distance, he felt the weight of her plea. She was not just asking for rescue, she was asking for life. He could not turn away, not when her last hope rested on him. His lantern flickered as he pulled back. His hands shook. He paced for a moment, thinking the rope he carried in his pack. Was not very long, but maybe it would reach. If not, he could tie it to a fallen beam nearby. He tested the ground, pressed his hand against the stones, and listened to the well's echoing depth. The alien woman's voice rose again, softer now. "I have a child. Waiting. Please." Those words crushed the last doubt in his mind. Daniel had lost his own family long ago, and the sound of her calling for her child tore open old wounds inside him. He whispered to himself, no one should be left to die. Like this, his choice was made. He would not leave her. He would not walk away. He set his lantern on the ground, unrolled his rope, and tied it tight. His heart hammered in his chest, fear and determination mixing like fire and ice. He leaned over the edge again and called down, "I hear you. I will come for you. Hold on." The alien woman's glowing eyes filled with tears, her lips moved, and a weak whisper floated back, "Thank you." The night around the ruins grew colder, the wind sharper, but inside that forgotten place, something had changed. A human had heard the cry of an alien, and he had chosen to answer. Daniel braced himself, checked the rope again, and prepared to risk his life for a stranger in the dark. The silence of the ruins no longer felt empty. It felt alive, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. And far below, the alien woman clung to his voice as if it were the rope itself. The first touch of hope after endless despair. The wind above the well grew stronger, pushing clouds across the moon. The light faded in and out, like a heartbeat in the sky, inside the deep stone hole. The alien woman's breaths came slow and shallow, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Stared up at the voice that had answered her cries. For hours she had begged the silent sky, and for hours no one came. But now, one voice had spoken back. A human voice filled with confusion, fear, and something more, care. Her chest rose and fell with painful effort, but she forced herself to sit up. The stones beneath her were sharp and wet. Her body ached. Her arms barely moved, but her heart refused to stay quiet. "Please," she whispered again. "I don't want to die here." She raised her hand toward the circle of sky. Her fingers trembled, weak and cold. Her glowing marks flickered like dying stars. "I have a daughter," she said softly. "She thinks I am still coming home." Her voice broke. Tears spilled from her eyes. They rolled down her cheeks and vanished into the dirt. Her glowing skin shimmered with each tear, lighting the well just a little more. Daniel stood at the edge, gripping the old stone tightly. His eyes locked onto hers. His heart felt like it was being torn in two. He had never seen a creature like her, alien, but beautiful. Strange, but clearly suffering. He had no reason to help her. No one would praise him. No one would pay him. In fact, he could die just trying. But still, he stayed. The woman kept talking, her voice weak, but full of fire. "They left me here because I was slowing them down. They said I was worthless, broken, useless." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. The anger in him grew with every word she said. He could hear the pain in her voice, the deep scars left by betrayal. "I begged them not to," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I begged for one more day, one more breath, just to see my child again. But they pushed me anyway." Her words were raw, like sharp glass. Daniel could hardly stand to listen, but he knew he had to. She needed to speak, to be heard. He lowered his voice and said, "You're not worthless. You're not broken." She blinked, the soft glow in her eyes trembling for a moment. It looked like she would break down completely. "You're the first person to say that," she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. He turned and checked his rope again. The knots were tight, the beam strong, but the well was deep, and she looked too weak to climb. "Can you move at all?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not much," she said, "but I can try." Daniel nodded. His voice was firm now. "Good. Just hold on. I'm coming down." She opened her mouth, stunned. "You would risk it for me." "I can't leave." "You hear?" he said. "No one should die like this." The woman bit her lip. Her body hurt too much to cry again, but inside, her heart burned with something new hope. "I didn't think anyone would come," she said softly. "I thought I would be forgotten." Daniel gave a small smile. "You cried out, and I heard you." Her hands clutched her chest. Her fingers brushed over the glowing marks that had once been bright symbols of her people's pride. Now they were dim, faded, but maybe they didn't mean weakness. Maybe they meant survival. She took a slow breath and called again, louder this time. "My name is Arasha." Daniel paused, his hand tightening around the rope. "I'm Daniel," he called back. "Hold on, Arasha. I won't let you die down there." She closed her eyes, the name echoing in her ears like a promise. In the silence that followed, she whispered to herself, "Daniel." Her voice was no longer just begging, it was believing. Her plea had been more than a cry for help. It was the last strength of a mother. The fire of someone who still believed her life had meaning, even in the dark, even at the bottom of a forgotten well. She had shouted into the world, and the world had answered with one man. Daniel braced his foot against the stone, pulled on the rope, and began his descent. Arasha pressed her hand to the stone wall beside her and whispered one last time into the silence, "Please, let him reach me." Far above, the wind blew stronger, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Watching a human climb toward the voice of a forgotten life, and down below, a broken alien mother waited not for death anymore, but for rescue. Daniel stood at the edge of the ancient well. The rope gripped tight in his hands. His eyes searched the depth again. Trying to judge how far he would have to go, the glowing marks on Arasha's skin gave him just enough light to see her faint shape far below. Motionless but still alive, the wind howled through the broken stones of the ruins. The old well creaked softly, as if warning him not to trust it, but Daniel had made up his mind. He had heard the desperation in Arasha's voice, and he couldn't forget the way she said her child was waiting. He dropped his backpack, pulled off his heavy jacket, and tied the rope tightly around a thick fallen beam nearby. He tested it 3 times, pulling with all his strength. Then knotted the other end around his waist. "This is a stupid idea," he whispered to himself. But walking away would feel worse. He took one final breath and began his climb down. The stones were cold against his palms. His boots scraped the wall, kicking small bits of gravel into the darkness. Every foot lower made the world above grow smaller, and the danger more real. He didn't speak as he climbed. He focused on each movement, every handhold, every shift of weight. Down below, Arasha watched, her eyes filled with light, not from her skin, but from something deeper. He was really coming. She wanted to call out again to guide him, but her throat burned too much. Her body refused to move. So she simply watched him descend like a shadow slowly becoming part of her world. Halfway down, Daniel's foot slipped. His heart jumped. The rope pulled tight and small rocks rained past him. For a moment, he dangled in the air. Swaying above the sharp stones at the bottom, he gasped but didn't scream. He gritted his teeth, found his footing again, and continued. "Keep going," he muttered. "She's down there, and she's waiting." As he lowered himself farther, he could finally see her more clearly. Her silver hair was tangled and dirty, her skin pale and cracked, but her eyes were still open. "Still watching, you're almost there," Arasha whispered, her voice just barely reaching him. "I see you," Daniel replied, his voice trembling from fear and cold. "Just a few more feet." The final stretch was the hardest. The walls were slippery. The rope burned his hands, and his legs shook from the strain. But at last, his boots touched solid ground. Daniel let out a deep breath and dropped to his knees. He looked at Arasha, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. She smiled weakly. You really came. Daniel gave a small nod. Told you I would. He crawled over to her and gently touched her shoulder. Her skin was ice cold. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive. We need to get you out of here, he said softly. Can you move at all? Arasha tried to sit up, but pain shot through her chest and arms. She shook her head. I'm too weak. Daniel looked around. The space was tight, the floor uneven, and the rope barely long enough. He knew he couldn't carry her on his back. While climbing, not with this setup, he ran his fingers over the rope, then looked back at her. I'll have to tie you in, pull you up first, then climb after you. Arasha blinked in shock. What if the rope breaks? Then we both fall, he answered honestly, but I'd rather try than leave you here. She looked at him, her eyes wide. You don't even know me. I don't have to, he said. I know what it feels like to be left behind. His fingers worked quickly, tying the rope around her waist, double knotting it with care. His hands were shaking. Not just from the cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He stood, took one last look at the dark shaft above, and whispered, Please don't fail me now. Slowly, carefully, he began to pull, inch by inch. Arasha rose from the floor. Her body swayed in the air, her breath catching in her throat. Daniel's arms screamed in pain, but he didn't stop. He leaned with all his weight, using his boots for grip, teeth clenched tight. The rope creaked and groaned. One of the knots slipped slightly. His heart nearly stopped, but it held. Arasha rose higher, her glowing skin casting dim light on the walls, up above. The sky began to brighten as the first light of dawn touched the ruins. She reached the top and weakly clutched the edge. Her fingers dug into the stone. With one final heave, Daniel pulled. And her body rolled over the rim. Safe, she lay there, unmoving, gasping for air. Down below, Daniel collapsed to his knees again. His body shook with exhaustion, but his heart felt lighter. He looked up, now facing the climb alone, and whispered, one more time. Daniel stood alone at the bottom of the well, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His muscles burned from pulling Arasha up. Sweat poured down his face, and every joint in his body screamed for rest. But he didn't have time. Above him, Arasha lay on the edge, too weak to move. Her glowing skin flickered in the cold morning air, and her lips trembled as she whispered his name. Daniel, she called softly, her voice thin like wind through broken glass. He looked up, gripping the rope with sore hands. The walls around him felt tighter now, the shadows pressing in from every side. The climb back up would not be easy. He tested the rope again. It was strong, but stretched from earlier, and the knot around the beam had loosened a little. He tied it tighter around his waist and took one last deep breath. I'm coming, he said to himself, and stepped onto the wall the first few feet. Were easier. His boots found holds in the cracked stones. His hands pulled slowly, one after the other. The cold air stung his fingers, but he ignored it. Above, Arasha tried to sit up. Her body felt like it was made of glass, but her heart wouldn't let her rest. She reached toward the rope and wrapped her fingers around it. Don't fall, she whispered. Please don't fall. Daniel climbed higher, the rough stone scraping his knuckles. At one point, his foot slipped, sending a chunk of rock crashing to the bottom. He froze, pressed against the wall. Breathing fast, steady, he told himself, just go. Slow, the shadows around him seemed to whisper doubts. You're not strong enough. You'll never make it. She's safe now. Why risk your life? But Daniel didn't listen. He had looked into Arasha's eyes, and he saw more than pain. He saw trust. He saw someone who had been thrown away, left to die, and still believed someone would come. He could not betray that hope. Hand over hand, he climbed. His arms felt like they were full of fire. His back ached, and sweat soaked his shirt. Every movement was a battle, every breath a struggle. Halfway up, his vision blurred. The rope twisted and his grip slipped. He screamed as he dangled in the air, the rope burning into his waist. "Daniel!" Arasha cried, pulling herself closer to the edge. Her hand reached for the rope. Though she knew she couldn't help, he swung against the stone, pain shooting through his shoulder. For a few seconds, he just hung there, the world spinning. Then, he growled and forced himself to grab the rope again. He pulled, his arms shaking, his legs scrambling for support. Inch by inch, he rose. The light above grew brighter as the sun slowly climbed into the sky, but inside the well, it still felt. Like night, Daniel reached the last few feet. His vision turned white at the edges. His heart pounded like thunder in his chest. Then, a hand reached over the side of Arasha's hand, trembling but determined. He looked up, surprised. "You shouldn't move," he said with a weak smile. "Neither should you." She whispered, "But here we are, with the last of her strength." She gripped the rope and held it steady. Daniel reached up, pulled, and finally, his fingers caught the rim of the well. He dragged himself over the edge and collapsed beside her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just lay there, breathing, shaking, alive. The morning wind brushed their faces, carrying the scent of dirt, wildflowers, and something new: freedom. Arasha turned her head toward him. Her eyes were full of tears, but this time, they were not just from pain. "You came back," she said. Softly, "I told you I would," Daniel replied. "Didn't think I'd make it though." She laughed. The sound light and broken, but real. They looked at each other in silence. Then Daniel reached out and took her hand. "We're out," he said. "You're safe?" "No." She whispered. "We're safe." Behind them, the old well stood still and silent. The same pit that had nearly stolen her life had now become the place where two broken souls met. Daniel didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but in that moment, he knew one thing. He had chosen to risk his life for a stranger. And in return, he had found something he didn't even know he was missing: purpose. And in the quiet shadow of the rising sun, the struggle and the darkness gave way to the first light of hope. The morning sun touched the broken stones of the old ruins, soft and golden. It warmed the earth gently, chasing away the cold night. But for Daniel and Arasha, lying side by side near the mouth of the deep well, the warmth felt like a miracle. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They were too tired, too sore, and too overwhelmed. Daniel lay flat on his back, breathing hard. The sky above him was endless, bright blue, filled with soft clouds, drifting slowly. He couldn't believe he was alive. Beside him, Arasha moved slightly. Her hand touched the earth, fingers curling into the dirt. The ground felt solid, real, and safe. "I never thought I'd feel the sun again," she whispered, her voice hoarse. But calm, Daniel turned his head to look at her. Her silver hair caught the morning light. And though her face was pale, her eyes had changed. There was still pain in them. But there was something new to hope. He smiled weakly. "You made it." She gave a soft laugh. "No, you made it happen." Daniel pushed himself up slowly. His muscles ached like fire, but he forced himself to move. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal bottle. He offered it to her. "Here, water," he said. Her fingers trembled as she took it. She drank slowly, her eyes closing. With relief, "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this. For everything." He nodded. "I couldn't leave you there." Not after hearing your voice. Arasha sat up with effort. Her legs were too weak to stand, but her mind was clear. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You saved my child's mother." Daniel looked at her with quiet respect. "Do you know where your child is?" She nodded. "A camp far from here, hidden in the hills. My people scattered when the attack happened. I was trying to reach them when I was caught and thrown down. Daniel's eyes darkened. They really just left you to die. Arasha looked away. They called me useless, said I would slow them down. Daniel clenched his fists, but then took a deep breath. You're not useless. You're stronger than most people I've met. Her eyes watered. You don't even know me. I don't have to, he said. I saw you fight to stay alive when everything tried to crush you. For a while, they just sat in silence again. The wind carried the smell of blooming grass and distant trees. Birds chirped softly. Somewhere nearby, then Arasha turned to him. Why did you really help me? Daniel paused, then spoke quietly. Because once, I cried out too. And no one came. Her lips parted. Surprised. My ship crashed years ago, he explained. I was stranded on a dead moon, broke my leg, used flares, radio, everything. No one answered. I was alone for days. Thought I'd die there. What happened? She asked gently, a stranger, a miner from a passing cargo freighter. Picked up a weak signal and came anyway. Daniel smiled faintly. He didn't even know who I was. He just came. Now it was Arasha's turn to be silent, I told myself. Daniel said, if I ever heard someone cry for help again, I'd answer. Her eyes filled with tears. But this time, she didn't cry out of pain. She reached out, slowly, and touched his hand. The contact was soft. Unsure at first, but when? Daniel didn't pull away. She tightened her grip. It was the first warm touch she had felt in days, maybe weeks. The sun rose higher, lighting their faces, and in that stillness, something passed between them, not just survival. Not just thanks, but connection. I won't forget this, Arasha said softly. Even if we never meet again, I will carry your name to my people. Daniel gave a tired smile. Let's get you to them first. She nodded. I'll guide you when I can walk. He stood slowly. Offered her both hands. She took them, and he gently helped her to her feet. Her legs shook. But she stayed up, leaning into him. Together, they took the first slow steps away from the well. Behind them, the shadow of the pit seemed to shrink in. The morning light, ahead, the land stretched wide and open, a long path full of danger, but also full of promise. Daniel looked at her and said, You don't have to walk alone anymore. And Arasha, holding tightly to his arm, whispered, Neither. Do you? The morning sun rose higher, painting the sky in soft gold and warm orange. The broken ruins behind them shimmered quietly under the light. Like the shadows had finally decided to sleep, Daniel walked slowly, his arm wrapped around Arasha's waist. Her steps were weak, her legs trembling with every move, but she kept going, step after step, holding on to him as if he was the only solid thing left in her world. They didn't speak much. Words were no longer needed, not after what they had been through. Each footstep away from that deep, dark well felt like a victory, like a breath pulled back from the edge of death. Birds flew overhead. The wind sang through the trees, and a new life was beginning, not just for Arasha, but for Daniel too. When they finally reached the top of a small hill, Arasha pointed with a shaking hand, far in the distance. Nestled between the rocks and trees lay a small hidden camp. There, she whispered. That's where my child is. Daniel squinted, seeing tents made of metal cloth, smoke rising gently from cooking fires, and shapes moving around slowly. He looked at her. Are you ready? She nodded. I've dreamed of this moment every hour I was trapped in that well. With every ounce of strength left in them, they pushed forward as they neared the camp. A young alien child ran out, her glowing skin a brighter version of Arasha's. She stared for a moment, unsure. Then her eyes widened in shock. Mama? The child screamed and ran with all her speed. Arasha dropped to her knees, tears pouring down her face, and opened her arms wide. The little girl threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing and laughing at the same time. "I knew you'd come back," the child cried. "I never stopped waiting." Arasha held her daughter tight, her hands shaking as she ran her fingers through the girl's hair. I'm here," she whispered over and over. "I never stopped trying." Daniel stood quietly behind them, watching the scene with a soft expression. Some of the other aliens came out slowly, curious, cautious. They looked at him with unsure eyes, but Arasha turned and raised her hand. "He saved me," she said, her voice strong now. "This human climbed into death to bring me back." The aliens stared in silence. Then slowly, one by one, they lowered their heads in respect. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, not used to attention. He looked at Arasha. "You don't have to say anything," but she shook her head. "No, they need to hear it. My people need to know that kindness still exists, even from those who don't look like us." Her daughter turned to Daniel and hugged him tightly. Her small arms wrapped around his waist. "Thank you," she said in a tiny voice, "for bringing my mama home." Daniel blinked hard, trying not to cry. He gently patted her back. "You have a strong mother," he said. She never gave up. That night, the camp lit a fire in Daniel's honor. Arasha sat close to it, wrapped in warm blankets, her child resting safely in her lap. Daniel sat nearby, holding a warm drink in his hands. He felt something deep in his chest, quiet peace he hadn't known in years. As the flames danced, Arasha looked at him and said, "When I cried out from that well, I thought no one would ever hear me, but I did." Daniel replied, "I heard you." She nodded, "Yes." And that changed everything, for a while. They just watched the fire in silence. Then Arasha spoke again. "What will you do now?" Daniel shrugged slightly. "I don't know. Keep walking, I guess. But maybe I've found something to stay for." Her eyes met his, soft and full of light. "Then stay," she whispered. "You're welcome here, not just as a hero, but as family." The fire crackled. The stars returned to the sky and around them. Laughter slowly returned to the camp. A new chapter had begun, not just for Arasha, not just for her child, but for Daniel too. All because, in a dark, forgotten well, a broken voice had cried out for life, and one human had chosen to listen.